The attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, remains one of the most devastating and emblematic episodes in modern history. Located on the island of Oahu, Hawaii, the Pearl Harbor Naval Base was the main strategic point for the United States Pacific Fleet. For years, rising tensions between the United States and Japan had accumulated due to Japan's expansion in Asia, the invasion of China, and aggressive economic policies aimed at consolidating vital resources such as oil and rubber. While diplomats attempted to negotiate, Japan secretly planned an offensive that would forever change the American perception of national security and the vulnerability of its overseas territories. On Sunday morning, thousands of Americans were caught off guard. The attack, which lasted just over 2 hours, involved about 350 Japanese aircraft, including fighters, bombers, and torpedo planes, launched from 6 aircraft carriers that remained out of visual range of the Hawaiian coast. The destruction was immediate and extensive. 8 battleships were damaged, 3 were sunk, and nearly 200 planes were destroyed. The physical devastation was compounded by psychological trauma. Families lost fathers, sons, and brothers, and the collective shock over the scale of destruction was profound. For many Americans, the war, previously distant, became brutally tangible. The impact of the attack was not limited to the number of deaths or the destruction of military equipment. The American public's confidence in their own safety was shaken, generating an unprecedented sense of vulnerability. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's statement that December 7 would be a date which will live in infamy reflected not only the severity of the attack but also an awareness that the psychological and cultural effects of the tragedy would extend for decades. Pearl Harbor thus became more than a military episode. It became a symbol of the risk of strategic surprise and the fragility of civilization in the face of technological warfare. For historians, analyzing the attack reveals significant strategic complexities. Japan calculated that a quick strike could temporarily neutralize the American fleet, securing freedom of action in Southeast Asia and the Pacific. However, although the destruction was considerable, the absence of American aircraft carriers at Pearl Harbor meant that the fleet's most valuable assets remained intact. This allowed the United States to rebuild its military capacity quickly, transforming the American response into an unprecedented demonstration of resilience. Beyond the military dimension, the attack exposed failures in intelligence and communication. Prior warnings about suspicious Japanese activity were ignored or underestimated, revealing gaps that cost lives and resources. Contemporary researchers argue that complacency and overconfidence in Pearl Harbor as an impenetrable fortress directly contributed to the initial success of the attack. This lesson extends to the present. The history of Pearl Harbor continues to be studied in military academies and strategy courses, illustrating the risks of excessive confidence and the importance of continuous vigilance. Finally, the human impact of Pearl Harbor cannot be underestimated. Among the dead and injured were civilians living in residential areas near the bases, as well as dock workers, sailors, and their families. Each life lost represented not just a statistic but a personal story interrupted, dreams shattered, and the beginning of years of collective mourning. The memory of these events shaped the American consciousness regarding war and peace, creating a lasting legacy that is reflected in the way the country approaches international conflicts to this day. The attack on Pearl Harbor was not merely a military tragedy, it radically altered the global geopolitical landscape. The day after the attack, on December 8, 1941, the United States declared war on Japan, officially marking the country's entry into World War II. Until then, although providing material support to Allied forces in Europe, the US had maintained a formal stance of neutrality. The experience of Pearl Harbor abruptly changed this position, transforming the United States from a distant observer into a central protagonist in the global conflict. The immediate geopolitical impact was felt on multiple levels. First, the Pacific became a theater of full-scale war, involving not only the US and Japan but also their respective colonies and allies. The islands of the Pacific became vital strategic points, and control of maritime routes gained central importance for military logistics. Each offensive and counteroffensive in the ocean was now shaped by the lesson of Pearl Harbor. Strategic surprise could redefine the balance of power within hours. On a global scale, US entry into the war caused significant shifts in diplomatic and military relations. European countries, already engaged against Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, could now count on American industrial and military mobilization. American economic strength, combined with its mass production capacity, accelerated the pace of the war and contributed to the defeat of the Axis powers. Meanwhile, Japan, which had sought to temporarily neutralize American capabilities in the Pacific, found itself in a prolonged and exhausting conflict whose strategic victory proved unattainable. Beyond the war itself, Pearl Harbor had profound diplomatic consequences. US-Japan relations, which had previously involved tense economic and political negotiations, became markedly hostile. The attack reinforced the American perception that Japanese expansion in Asia represented an existential threat, justifying strict economic sanctions and an unprecedented military mobilization. This hostility shaped Pacific diplomacy for decades, influencing treaties, military agreements, and the continued US presence in the region well into the 21st century. Another critical effect of the attack was the transformation of the public imagination. Pearl Harbor symbolized national vulnerability and the need for constant vigilance, creating a cultural climate of alertness in the face of external threats. This sentiment permeated domestic and foreign policies, encouraging investment in intelligence, communication, and military technology. The collective memory of the attack came to be used in political speeches and educational programs, reinforcing the narrative that national security requires constant preparation and the capacity for rapid response. In parallel, the attack revealed weaknesses in military communication and command structures. Prior warnings about Japanese movements were underestimated or ignored, exposing failures that cost lives. This lesson prompted profound reforms in the organization of the U.S. Armed Forces, including the creation of more rigorous intelligence protocols and strategic monitoring systems. The legacy of these changes is still visible in contemporary armed forces, where preventing strategic surprises remains a top priority. Finally, the attack had lasting consequences for civilian society. The American mobilization after Pearl Harbor affected all aspects of life, from industry to education and popular culture. Patriotism increased, but tensions also arose, such as the historical injustice against citizens of Japanese descent, exemplified by the internment of thousands of Japanese Americans. This episode demonstrates how war and fear can impact entire societies, altering perceptions and behaviors for generations. Understanding these consequences is essential to contextualize any contemporary reference to Pearl Harbor. When public figures, such as former President Donald Trump, make jokes about the event, they are engaging with a collective memory burdened by human suffering, geopolitical impact, and profound social transformations. The attack was not merely a military episode, it was a global turning point that shaped politics, society, and international diplomacy in irreversible ways. Pearl Harbor is remembered not only for its military dimension but, above all, for the devastating impact it had on the lives of ordinary people. More than 2,400 Americans lost their lives on that December Sunday in 1941, including sailors, soldiers, and civilians working near the naval base. More than 1,100 were injured, many suffering burns, mutilations, and psychological trauma that lasted for decades. Each number represents a personal story interrupted, shattered families, and entire communities shaken by sudden and violent loss. Among the dead were young sailors on their first missions, fathers supporting their households, and civilian workers simply going about their daily routines. Many bodies were never recovered, especially those of the men lost aboard the USS Arizona, turning the missing into symbols of sacrifice and tragedy. For survivors, the attack left profound physical and psychological scars. The so-called shock of Pearl Harbor marked, in many cases, the beginning of a prolonged period of emotional trauma, characterized by insomnia, anxiety, and recurring nightmares, reflecting the horror of the destruction they witnessed. The human dimension of the attack also extends to the collective psychological impact on the American population. Before Pearl Harbor, many citizens believed the United States was geographically protected from external attacks. The reality of that Sunday radically changed this perception. The sudden vulnerability and the deaths of so many compatriots created a sense of national insecurity, reinforcing the fear that war could reach any citizen, anywhere, even in times of apparent peace. The trauma extended to families who lost loved ones. Widows, orphans, and parents of deceased children faced not only grief but also economic and social challenges, as many families depended on the income of sailors and base workers. Survivor and family stories formed a collective narrative of suffering and resilience, preserved in diaries, letters, interviews, and memorials. These accounts are essential to understanding that the tragedy of Pearl Harbor transcended the war in terms of numbers, deeply affecting the American social fabric. The collective memory of Pearl Harbor also shaped the country's culture and politics in the following decades. Films, books, documentaries, and official ceremonies kept the memory of the attack alive, turning it into a symbol of vigilance, patriotism, and sacrifice. Monuments such as the USS Arizona Memorial in Honolulu not only honor the dead but also educate generations about the horrors of war and the importance of strategic awareness. This collective memory serves a pedagogical function, reminding society that complacency in the face of external threats can have devastating consequences. The attack also had lasting effects on American domestic policy. The experience of Pearl Harbor demonstrated that war is not only a matter of military strategy but directly involves civilian lives and entire communities. The need to protect citizens and maintain effective communication across different levels of command became a priority. This led to significant reforms in intelligence, emergency protocols, and national defense strategies, the legacy of which continues to this day. Moreover, the memory of the attack influences how Americans perceive their global responsibilities. Pearl Harbor became a reminder of the importance of alliances, preventive diplomacy, and maintaining a military force capable of responding quickly to crises. Every historical reference to the attack carries these lessons, and any trivialization of the event, even in a joking tone, can generate controversy and discomfort, especially when made by politically visible leaders. In the contemporary context, when public figures make humorous comments about Pearl Harbor, the effect is often perceived as disrespectful, not only to the memory of the victims but also to the gravity of the historical lessons the attack represents. The tragedy of Pearl Harbor remains one of the most powerful references to vulnerability, strategic surprise, and human suffering caused by war, and it must be treated with sensitivity and historical awareness. On March 19, 2026, during a meeting at the White House with Japanese Prime Minister Sonai Takeichi, former President Donald Trump made a joke involving the attack on Pearl Harbor. The situation occurred in a delicate diplomatic context, with journalists questioning American stances regarding recent military movements and coordination with international allies. Trump's response, attempting to make light of the element of surprise, referenced Pearl Harbor in a way that compared historical events with contemporary situations during his administration. Although delivered in a humorous tone, the statement caused immediate discomfort for the Japanese Prime Minister, who appeared visibly apprehensive and elicited varied reactions among those present, including aides, journalists, and diplomats. For many observers, the comment was perceived as insensitive, given the historical context of the tragedy that claimed thousands of American lives and left deep marks on the collective memory of both the United States and Japan. The joke quickly became a topic of discussion in international media, social networks, and political analysis forums, highlighting the impact that a leader's words can have when referencing traumatic events. The episode underscores the risk of trivializing historical tragedies in diplomatic settings. Pearl Harbor is considered not only a military landmark but also a symbol of human suffering and strategic caution. Any reference to it, especially in a humorous tone, has the potential to be interpreted as disrespectful, affecting international relations and undermining the perceived seriousness of a leader when addressing sensitive global matters. Beyond the immediate discomfort, Trump's joke generated critical analysis regarding contemporary American diplomacy. Experts noted that by using an episode of extreme historical gravity as a metaphor or humorous element, a political leader risks creating misunderstandings, offending allies, and generating long-lasting repercussions for their country's international image. Historically, Pearl Harbor symbolizes not only strategic surprise but also the human cost of war, and its mention requires caution. Media reactions were intense. Major outlets and commentators highlighted the irony of the comment, but also the lack of historical sensitivity, emphasizing that the 1941 attack claimed thousands of lives and altered the course of World War II. Criticism extended beyond the content of the joke to its context, a diplomatic meeting with the leader of a country directly involved in the history. The general perception was that, regardless of intent, the joke negatively impacted the host's image, generating dismay and disapproval both nationally and internationally. The episode also illustrates a broader point about historical memory and the responsibility of political leaders. Pearl Harbor continues to be studied and remembered as a warning about the human cost of strategic decisions, and any comment that trivializes it can be seen as a disrespect to historical lessons and lost lives. Diplomacy, in this context, requires sensitivity and recognition of the symbolic weight of past events, especially when the audience includes representatives of nations that experienced the tragedy firsthand. Moreover, the joke sparked debates about modern political communication. Leaders with high public visibility need to balance informality and humor with the gravity of historical matters. The reaction of the public, the press, and foreign leaders demonstrates that the perception of insensitivity can have significant repercussions, affecting alliances, negotiations, and a country's credibility on the international stage. In summary, Trump's joke about Pearl Harbor exemplifies how historical events with strong emotional and political weight should not be treated lightly. It serves as a contemporary warning: the past remains alive in collective memory and global diplomacy, and any attempt to use it humorously or ironically can have real consequences, including diplomatic discomfort, international criticism, and damage to political reputation.